Ron Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I guess there has to be one, and so New Zealand First will signal right at this point now that we intend voting against this legislation. New Zealand First has listened to the arguments and looked closely at the realities of those arguments. We'd start by saying that the loophole, the so perceived loophole that is seen by the architects of this bill is a matter of opinion. It's a matter of opinion, and New Zealand First does not share that opinion. The current law allows for local board power to be concentrated in the hands of a few, which undermines the efficacy and fairness of a local electoral system. Really? Is that right? Well, in actual fact, we would like to have seen some evidence that that was the truth. But it is so often in all the debate this evening, people have referred to the words of perception. Well, we could talk about perception with respect to a whole raft of legislation that goes through this House that this government has not supported. So we don't see consistency. We see that the perceived loophole is a matter of opinion, which is distinctly not matched by evidence, and certainly not matched by convincing evidence. The argument that 3 people opposed the legislation could well be countered, Mr. Speaker, by the thousands of people who voted to elect these people who the National Party has a problem with holding 2 positions on 2 boards. That these people were elected by the people of those 2 boards says that there are thousands of people who in Auckland who are quite comfortable with the legislation as it currently sits. We might argue that, in actual fact, it is the right of those electors.
The member's voice is bouncing across and going into the mic across. So if she could just talk a little bit more quietly. We're getting it back here, and member might prefer that that's not the case. Ron Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that. We might argue that, in actual fact, if the good people of those boards so affected by this problem saw a problem, they wouldn't elect these people to multiple boards. If they seriously objected to the fact that person A was standing in Papakura and standing in the neighbouring ward, they wouldn't vote for them. It might well be, actually, as while some people, and it is a propensity of some political parties in this House to want to give preference to other people, to aid them, assist them to get elected, that's been clearly indicated by the Mitarura Nui private members bill that he brought before the House in the Bay of Plenty, which created reserved council positions on the Bay of Plenty Council. A position which, ironically, the National Party voted against. So on the one hand, we in New Zealand sit here rather confused with the fact that the National Party would vote against Labor's private members bill, which reserves seats to give all those things that Labor has argued for today, a greater opportunity for Māori and Pacific Island to get elected. National voted against that. And now here they're sitting here bleeding on, allowing a person who shows the aptitude, the gumption, the work ethic, the support of 2 wide communities to be so democratically elected to hold 2 appointments should be kneecapped. Well, actually, we would say in New Zealand First that I find it astonishing that the ACT Party, and we'll be watching with curiosity, see how the ACT Party votes on this issue. Because we would share, we would think, a view that it is the right of people to stand where they wish and let the voting public decide. That is the core fundamental issue that confronts a true democracy. Democracy may not be perfect. Who said that? Winston Churchill? But it's the best form of government we know. And we would say, and in fact, how often have we been told by our parents, our grandparents, that you want a job done, give it to a busy person. Give it to someone who cracks on, not to someone who needs a little leg up to get elected because they're Māori or because they're Pacific Island or because they're, they're in some way disadvantaged and they can't make it on their own, through their own. If you want to look at examples of people who get elected despite the odds, despite all the rhetoric that they're disadvantaged, look no further than Georgina Beyer. Georgina Beyer gets elected to Mayor of Carterton as a transsexual New Zealander and goes on against the odds in a highly conservative blue ribbon seat called the Wairarapa to win the Wairarapa. Does she need a leg up? Does she need a hand? Does she need preferential treatment? Some people to mollycoddle her and look after her little every poor failing whim? No, she didn't, Mr. Speaker. She got it because she had the skills and the confidence of the people that she could do the job. And here we sit, the National Party, advocating that highly competent, highly respected people with high work ethic should be denied the opportunity to be elected to represent multiple communities by those communities who so wish them to do so. This little piece of legislation, which has been described here in the House tonight as nothing of mean importance, might well come back to bite a few people on the podiums at candidatures in the next general election quite severely, because this little piece of legislation interdicts the very fundamentals of democracy. If someone has the support of their community, if those two communities so affected see no conflict of interest, and I've yet to see in anything that was put before the committee, Mr. Speaker, or hear anything that was said tonight that evidences this supposed perception of conflict. Want a perception of conflict that the National Party could deal with? Here's one. The Police Act used to deny police officers the right to be on a council and a member of Parliament. Same as the Defence Force. It denies also members of Parliament from serving in the police force at the same time that they're a member of Parliament. Not the Police Act, but other legislation does. Why? Because the three pillars that underpin our democracy, that separate the judiciary from the lawmakers to the law enforcers, those three pillars were always considered sacrosanct. And yet what did the National Party do? Overturned Labor-passed legislation in the Police Act to stop police officers being councillors at the same time they were police officers. That was argued when it was put through by the Police Commissioner, by 2 or 3 police commissioners, by the Police Officers Guild, that this, allowing police officers to continue to do that, actually created a perception of conflict of interest, that the person who was enforcing the law had become a lawmaker. And here we're sitting in the House today saying, oh, there's a perception of a conflict of interest. Where's the evidence? All I hear is envy. All I hear is grizzling and moaning that someone whipped someone else's butt and got elected, not on 1 board, but in 2. Well, here's the message from New Zealand First. If you can't handle the heat, get out of the kitchen. If you can't match it in the community and convince the people of your community that you're worth electing, don't put your name up. If you can't stand the fact that you get beaten by someone who's highly respected, not just in their ward that they live in, but in another ward, then don't compete. And if the National Party truly believes what it's saying here tonight, it will cease its practice of parachuting into rural New Zealand people like John Hayes, who didn't live there, people like Alistair Scott, who doesn't live there, and gerrymandering the party selection process to ensure that these people are elected in safe seats. There's a word that I'm not allowed to use, Mr. Speaker, so I won't sum up with that word. All I will say is this bill smacks of being anti-democratic, and New Zealand First won't have a bar of it. Thank you.
The question is that the motion is agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. The contrary opinion will say no. The ayes have it. The party vote is called for. The clerk will conduct